someone accuses you of being an enabler of sexual assault, don't you need to respond to it? I mean, particularly since this is an issue that you wanted to talk about on the campaign trail. Campus sexual assault, you say that survivors need to be believed and they need to be heard. So when he's accusing you of doing something that is the antithesis of what you want to talk about, don't you need to address it?
I'm going to let the voters decide what's relevant and what's not relevant in their decision as to who they're going to support.
Yeah, I give Allison Camerata a lot of credit for asking that question, and the voters are deciding. Joining us now on the Malzberg panel, Brad Hirschfield, author of You Don't Have to Be Wrong for Me to Be Right, and president of CLAL, and Adam Thompson, senior partner of the law offices of Adam M. Thompson, and also syndicated talk show host. All right, let me start with you, Brad. New York Times, big story today in the New York Times. 90s scandals threaten to erode Hillary Clinton's strength with women. And they quote from George Stephanopoulos, who talked about how Hillary said, we got to stop that woman, about one of the Clinton quote-unquote bimbos. They talk about Carl Bernstein, they quote him from a book, about how Hillary led the campaign to discredit the women who came forward against Bill Clinton. And now women, even like Lena Dunham, the producer of the HBO series Girls, she's starting to say, well, you know, this what she did in the 90s really doesn't translate well into this day and age.
Well, that's certainly true. I'm not sure I would rely on Lena Dunham for much, but that's just my personal bias.
No, it's the polls. You can look at the polls.
But your point is incredibly well taken, and I think the language she actually used with regard to Jennifer Flowers was destroy that woman. She used lots of inappropriate language, but the biggest problem, I think, is when she can look at Allison Camerata and say in straight face, I'm not going to address this, I'm going to let the voters decide. I think the voters will decide. At the very least, she would need to come clean and be able to say, here's the thing, I believe you should take women's charges of sexual abuse very seriously. I also take seriously the desire to defend my husband, and as I look back on it, I made some poor decisions. But to avoid this and pretend that it was just a nothing, I think she's making a terrible mistake. But that's hardly the first time she's done that.
What about it, Adam?
You know, it's hypocrisy at its best. She put an attack out against Donald Trump about his views on women and said basically he had problems with women. Yet, when the thing is thrown to her in the same line for what she did in supporting her husband with all the mass sexual harassment claims or sexual assault claims, it doesn't apply and let the voters decide. I mean, I don't know how she thinks she can get away with this, because if you're going to accuse one candidate and want answers from that candidate, the public wants answers from you too, Hillary, and you're going to have to give them. I know you don't want to because it hurts your campaign and shows what a fraud you are about the war on women, and you're part of it, but you're going to have to answer up sometime.
All right, you know, and well, how could she do it? The other day, she stood in South Carolina, Martin Luther King's birthday, and said, this Confederate flag never belonged hanging over a state house. Meanwhile, her husband signed Confederate Flag Day into law, kept the flag with the star there representing the Confederacy, and it still flies over the Arkansas State House. That's how she could do it. All right, another story. Fast and Furious. You remember the then Attorney General Eric Holder was held in contempt of Congress over this. Now it turns out one of the real high-powered guns that was used in Fast and Furious, which was where the U.S. government allowed Mexican criminals to buy guns, and then they thought they would trace the guns back to the criminals. It was a disaster. They lost track of 1,400 of 2,000 guns. Now in El Chapo's hideout, they found a gun that the U.S. used in Fast and Furious that could take down a helicopter, Brad.
Yeah, it was a disaster. The truth is Holder should have been found in contempt, and we're going to learn more because now a federal judge has ruled that President Obama cannot use executive privilege to keep this story secret. I completely appreciate that it may not be for general dissemination for security purposes, but Congress not only has a right to know, it needs to know. This technique is used in lots of circumstances. You put a little bait out, you figure out what rat is going to take it, and you follow the rat. But they lost track of 70% of the rats.
Yeah.
And now one of the weapons that was found, really, these are the guns you use to put a hole in an engine block of a helicopter or a large vehicle. This is serious, this is dangerous, and someone needs to be held responsible.
Adam, it's the third time that a weapon from Fast and Furious has been found at the scene of a high-profile crime in Mexico.
This just shows the incompetence of how these operations are set up and executed. Whoever comes up with these ideas of giving these arms to people or letting them be available and accessible in these areas is beyond me. Remember, this isn't just the only situation we're talking about like this. 500 million or more was spent on training and supplying weapons in Iraq or Syria related areas to help our enemies against our enemies. And all those weapons and all that money was spent on nothing. And now we see that those might end up again in the hands of ISIS. So this is a repeating situation of ongoing incompetence. When is real leadership going to step up and correct this and make right calls?
Absolutely, and this is a story that the media really hasn't focused on at all. Not the court decision that Brad alluded to the other day, and not this part of the story either. But it will, as long as people like us keep talking about it. I thank you, Brad. I thank you, Adam. Great discussion. Up next, Give Me Five. We'll focus on Sarah Palin and a Republican strategist. You're not going to want to miss this.